All right, so this is going to be the first section on the elbow, which is the bones and ligaments. So we'll start with the bones of the elbow. So there's three bones in your elbow, the humerus, the radius, and the ulna that come together here. So the humerus coming down from the upper arm. The ulna is going to be the part of your elbow that you can feel, and then the radius here on the inside. It's really more part of the wrist than the elbow, but we'll talk about that. When you take the humerus by itself, and this is sort of the shoulder would be up here, this is the bottom end of the humerus, you're going to see, just like the knee, epicondyles on both sides, so lateral and medial. On your own elbow, if you were to feel the bump on the inside of your elbow, that's the medial epicondyle, and then same on the outside. So they're pretty easy to feel when you palpate your own elbow. Just above that, you're going to have a little ridge called the supra, meaning above, condylar ridge. Again, you'll have it on both sides. It's a lot more angled here on the medial side than the lateral side. You'll get some muscle attachments there, and that's why I'm just pointing it out. Coronoid fossa is here, right in this little spot. And there's a process on the ulna called the coronoid process. And when you flex your elbow, it actually fits into this little space. So that's why it's there. Radial fossa, same situation, just a little smaller here. And when you flex the elbow, it will fit into that space as well. That's on the lateral side. This is coronoid on the medial side. The capitulum is on the bottom, and it is just the round part here, okay? And it's just below the lateral epicondyle. Again, just part of the mechanism that makes the elbow the hinge joint that it is. The trochlea is on the medial side. If you look at it, just by itself, it kind of looks like a spool of thread if you've ever seen that. Otherwise, just remember that the capitulum's lateral and the trochlea is on the medial side. The olecranon fossa is going to be on the back side of the humerus. This is actually the olecranon process here that fits into it when you extend your elbow. Otherwise, you'll have that little depression there when it's flexed. All right, moving on to the radius. If you are to stand in anatomical position, so with the front of your arm facing forwards, thumbs out, the radius is going to be your more lateral forearm bone. You're going to want to remember that. It lines up with your thumb, and the ulna is going to line up on the pinky side. So again, as I mentioned earlier, you can see down here the radius has a much larger role in the wrist than it does in the elbow. It's not even technically connected to the real elbow joint, but it does play a small role at that level. So really the only thing you're going to want to know about the radius here, there's three things. One would be the head, which is round, which is why it's called the radius. And then the neck is just below that, and those are at the proximal end of the bone. So you see it here on this side, and then posteriorly as well, the head is just a nice round circle. The radial tuberosity is the other thing you want to know. It's a big bump. Actually, let me go back here. You can see it better on this slide. Here's the bump of the radial tuberosity. The reason you want to know that is that's actually where the biceps tendon of insertion is. And so that's part of the reason that it has that bony formation to resist the pull of flexion from that muscle. But it's very obvious when you see an actual radial bone where that tuberosity is. So just remember the head, the neck, and the radial tuberosity. On the lower end, you've got a styloid process, again, more related to the wrist. But, at this point, you can still see it there on the lateral side. And then there's a little notch on the ulna where the radius fits. So again, like I said, this is a round circle. So there's a little indentation here where the head fits so that it can rotate when you turn your thumb back and forth. And that's just where that joint is created between the radius and the ulna. All right, speaking of the ulna, let's move on to that one. It's going to be on the medial side or the pinky side, okay, more medial forearm bone. And it is very prominently affected in the joint of the elbow. So really that is the true elbow joint, is between the ulna and the humerus. The olecranon process, probably the easiest thing to find on your elbow. That's the pointy part of your elbow that you can feel. It's on the proximal posterior end. So this is looking sideways. You can see it here. This is a posterior view in the back. The trochlear notch is kind of a U-shaped notch that fits into the trochlea and really allows for that solid hinge joint connection that you have in the elbow. Okay, and that's where the joint is truly formed. The coronoid process, so this is a good way to see it. This is the trochlear notch here. It's a nice, it looks like a U if you hold the bone sideways. That's how I always remember which one is the ulna, because it has a U. At the front of that trochlear notch, there's a little process that comes off. That's the coronoid process, and that's what fits into the coronoid fossa that is on the humerus. Okay, and that's the anterior part of the trochlear notch. There's the radial notch, which we talked about, which is right by the radial head there, just lateral to the coronoid process. You also have an ulnar styloid, which is pretty easy to palpate down by your pinky. There's actually, on a lot of people, there's kind of a bump down by your wrist on the pinky side, and that's your ulnar styloid process. All right, so if you're looking at an elbow, really easy to find these three things, which is going to be your epicondyles and your olecranon. So when you have your elbow straight, they're kind of in a line, and then when you bend them, they're more like what you're seeing here, which is sort of a triangular shape. On the lateral side, you've got the lateral epicondyle. Just below that is the head of the radius. If you take your hand and you kind of flip your palm up and down, you can actually feel the radius rotating. So that's an easy way to pick that part of it out. And then on the wrist, again, that bump I was telling you about is there on the ulnar side, and the radial styloid, a little harder to feel, but if you kind of really feel around in there, you'll feel the end of it just at the base of the thumb. All right, that's the end of the first section.